The morning of August 31st, 1943, Marcus Island sits alone in the Pacific, 1,500 miles northwest of Wake, a tiny coral atoll that means nothing strategically except for the Japanese garrison holding it and the airstrip they've carved into its surface. At precisely 0930 hours, radar operators on the island detect incoming aircraft, American carrier strike packages approaching from the southeast. The alert sounds. Japanese pilots scramble toward their Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, already warmed and waiting. What happens in the next 18 minutes will fundamentally alter Pacific air combat doctrine. Not because of the number of aircraft destroyed, though several Zeros will burn into the ocean that morning. And not because of some revolutionary weapon system, though the Americans are flying a fighter most Japanese pilots have never encountered. The change comes because of a single performance characteristic that Japanese tactical doctrine cannot counter. The Grumman F6F Hellcat can climb at 3,400 feet per minute under optimal conditions. And when Japanese pilots see that climb rate for the first time in actual combat, their radio transmissions back to base will contain warnings that will echo through every Japanese naval aviation unit for the remainder of the war. The Zero has dominated Pacific skies since December 1941. Every American naval aviator knows the statistics because the statistics determine whether they come home. The Zero weighs 5,300 pounds empty. Its Nakajima Sakai 14-cylinder radial engine produces 940 horsepower. That power-to-weight ratio translates to a climb rate exceeding 3,000 feet per minute in the hands of an experienced pilot. More importantly, the Zero can sustain that climb while maneuvering, while turning, while doing everything Japanese doctrine has trained its pilots to do. American pilots flying F4F Wildcats have learned brutal lessons about what happens when you try to climb with a Zero. The Wildcat weighs 5,800 pounds empty, with an engine producing only 1,200 horsepower. On paper, that should give it better performance. More power means faster climb. Except the Wildcat's additional weight and draggy airframe design means it climbs at only 2,300 feet per minute. That 800 foot per minute deficit becomes a killing gap within 90 seconds of initial contact. Here's how the killing happens. You're flying combat air patrol at 12,000 feet. You spot a formation of Japanese aircraft at the same altitude, 3 miles away. You push your throttle forward and begin climbing to gain altitude advantage before engagement. Standard fighter doctrine. Get above your enemy. The Zero pilots see you simultaneously and execute the same maneuver. Both formations pitch their noses up. Both pilots are pulling maximum continuous power. After 60 seconds, you've climbed 1,300 feet. The Zeros have climbed 1,700 feet. They're now 400 feet above you, and that gap is widening with every second that passes. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Zero pilots don't have to do anything complicated now. They simply maintain their climb for another 30 seconds, reaching altitude that gives them complete energy dominance. Then they roll inverted and dive on your formation with the sun behind them. You see them coming, but your options are catastrophically limited. You can't outclimb them because they're already above you with superior rate of climb. You can't dive away because then you're running, abandoning your mission, and probably abandoning the bombers you're supposed to be protecting. You have to fight, and you're fighting from a position of fundamental disadvantage. Lieutenant, Commander John Thatch figured out a partial solution in 1942 with his famous weave maneuver, pairs of fighters scissoring back and forth to cover each other's tails. It's brilliant defensive flying, and it genuinely works within its limitations. When two Wildcats execute the weave correctly, they create a mutual defense pattern that's nearly impossible for a Zero to crack without taking fire. The problem surfaces when you examine what the weave actually accomplishes. It keeps you alive. It doesn't let you win. The weave trades killing power for staying power. Here's what happens in a typical engagement over the Solomons in late 1942. 4 Wildcats in 2 weaving pairs encounter 6 Zeros at 14,000 feet. The Americans execute their scissors pattern perfectly. The Zeros make their initial diving pass, and the weave forces them to break off without scoring kills, because every time a Zero commits to one Wildcat, that pilot's wingman is turning into a firing position. Beautiful defensive flying. The Zeros climb away, the Wildcats try to pursue, and this is where the physics problem reasserts itself with lethal clarity. To maintain the weave, both aircraft have to coordinate their turns. Every turn bleeds energy. Every weave cycle costs you 40 knots of airspeed and 800 feet of altitude. You're deliberately sacrificing your climb performance to maintain mutual support. Meanwhile, the Zeros flying independently now pour all their energy into vertical climbing. 3 minutes later, they're back at 18,000 feet. The Wildcats are struggling to reach 13,000 feet, and they're 90 knots slower than when the engagement started. Commander Thatch himself acknowledges this limitation in a February 1943 briefing to carrier squadron leaders. His exact words, recorded in the training minutes: "The weave gives our boys the defensive edge they need to survive the first encounter. It does not give them the offensive capability to pursue and destroy a climbing enemy." He's not criticizing his own tactic, he's stating its boundaries. The weave is a breakthrough in defensive fighter doctrine, but it's inherently reactive. You're responding to Japanese attacks. You're not dictating the terms of combat. The Zero pilots decide when to engage and when to break off. They hold the initiative because they can always climb away faster than you can follow while maintaining your defensive formation. Some aggressive pilots try abandoning the weave to chase climbing Zeros. The loss rates for these attempts are catastrophic. You break from your wingman, go full throttle, and pitch up to pursue a climbing Zero. For maybe 45 seconds, you feel like you're gaining. Your gun sight is tracking him. Then, your airspeed drops below 180 knots. The controls get heavy. Your rate of climb deteriorates from inadequate to pathetic. The Zero you're chasing is still accelerating upward at a steeper angle. Worse, you've separated from your wingman, which means you've lost your mutual support. Other Zeros in the area see a lone Wildcat in a slow climb, maximum vulnerability. They position above and behind you, and the first indication you have of their presence is 7.7mm rounds punching through your armor plate. If you're lucky, you recognize the danger fast enough to push the nose down and dive away. If you're not lucky, your squadron mates watch your aircraft trailing smoke and fire as it arcs into the ocean. The mathematics are unforgiving. In coordinated weave formations, Wildcat pairs achieve approximately 1.3 kills per loss against Zeros, survivable but barely sustainable. Individual Wildcats attempting to pursue climbing Zeros achieve 0.4 kills per loss. Utterly catastrophic. The doctrine writes itself. Stay in the weave, don't chase them into altitude. Focus on protecting the bombers and surviving to land back on the carrier. It's sound tactical thinking given the equipment constraints, but it leaves American fighter pilots feeling helpless. They're flying defensively in an offensive war. Every engagement ends the same way. You survive. The Zeros climb away. Tomorrow they're back with altitude advantage. You can't win a war of attrition when the enemy dictates every engagement's start and finish. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation understands this problem intimately, because they built the Wildcat. They receive every combat action report from the Pacific. They debrief every pilot who rotates back to the States. They know their fighter is keeping men alive through rugged construction and reliable systems, but they also know it's not giving those men the tools to dominate combat. The solution begins taking shape on the drafting tables at Grumman's Bethpage, New York facility throughout 1942. The XF6F prototype has been in development since before Pearl Harbor, but actual combat data from Wildcat pilots now drives every design decision. Chief Engineer William Schwendler and Leroy Grumman himself approach the problem methodically. What works in the Wildcat? The protected fuel tanks work. The armor plating works. The ability to absorb tremendous battle damage and keep flying works. What doesn't work? Speed doesn't work. Climb rate doesn't work. The ability to pursue a climbing enemy doesn't work. The heart of their solution is the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows. Air-cooled radial configuration producing 2,000 horsepower. This isn't incremental improvement. The Wildcat's Wright Cyclone produces 1,200 horsepower. The Double Wasp delivers 67% more power. That's the kind of increase that changes what an aircraft can do fundamentally. But raw power means nothing without proper application. The Zero's 940 horsepower moves 5,300 pounds. The Hellcat's 1,000 horsepower will have to move 9,000 pounds empty, 15,000 pounds fully loaded for combat. Grumman engineers obsess over every pound of weight and every square inch of aerodynamic drag. The wing design alone goes through 17 iterations before they settle on the final configuration. 42 feet 10 inches of span, 334 square feet of area. The largest wing of any fighter in the Second World War. That massive wing serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It generates enough lift to get 15,000 pounds off a carrier deck in less than 500 feet. It contains 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. It folds hydraulically for carrier storage, letting each ship pack more fighters below deck. And most critically, it provides the lift-to-drag ratio necessary to sustain a 3,400 foot per minute climb rate while carrying full combat load. The first XF6F1 prototype flies on June 26, 1942. Initial results are promising but not spectacular. Grumman swaps in the more powerful R2 80010 engine variant for the XF6F3 prototype. That aircraft flies on July 30th, 1942, and immediately demonstrates the performance characteristics the Navy desperately needs. The climb rate in particular catches everyone's attention. Test pilots at Naval Air Station Patuxent River push the prototype through its paces and document what happens when you give a naval aviator 2,000 horsepower and a well-designed airframe. From sea level, the Hellcat reaches 10,000 feet in 4 minutes. That's not just faster than the Wildcat, it's competitive with the Zero. More importantly, the Hellcat maintains controllability throughout that climb. You're not trading precision for climb rate. You can climb aggressively and still have enough control authority to track a target or evade an attack. The Zero does this through lightweight construction and minimal equipment. The Hellcat does it through brute power and intelligent design while carrying armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 60% more ammunition than the Zero. By October 1942, the Navy orders production to begin even before completing all testing phases. The Pacific Fleet can't wait for peacetime procurement timelines. Every month the Hellcat isn't in combat is another month of American pilots fighting with inadequate equipment. Grumman's Bethpage facility retooled production lines. Workers who've been building Wildcats transition to the new fighter. The first production F6F3 seconds roll off the line in January 1943. USS Essex receives the first operational Hellcats in May 1943, assigned to VF9 Squadron. Pilots transitioning from Wildcats immediately feel the difference during carrier qualifications. The Hellcat's longer landing gear absorbs deck impacts better. The wider track makes it more stable during takeoffs. That massive engine pulls them off the deck with authority that inspires confidence. But combat performance remains theoretical until Japanese pilots provide the real test. The test comes on August 31st, 1943 during Operation Rugged over Marcus Island. VF9 from Essex launches Hellcats as part of a carrier task force strike. The operation's objective is straightforward: hit Japanese installations and draw out their air forces to test American strength. What Japanese pilots encounter that day fundamentally challenges their understanding of American fighter capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient and one of the Navy's most experienced fighter tacticians, leads elements of the strike. His pilots have trained extensively with the Hellcat's vertical fighting capabilities, practicing what they call boom and zoom tactics. The concept is simple, but requires discipline. Use altitude advantage to dive on enemy aircraft. Make a high-speed firing pass, Then use that speed to climb back to altitude rather than turning with the target. The Hellcat's climb rate makes this possible in ways the Wildcat never could. Japanese Zero pilots from the 252nd and 253rd Kokutai engage the American strike package, expecting the familiar pattern of combat they've experienced against Wildcats. Initial attacks follow standard doctrine. Try to draw the Americans into turning fights where Japanese maneuverability will dominate. But Hellcat pilots refuse the bait. When Zeros attempt to climb after breaking American fighters, something unexpected happens. The Americans climb away, maintaining or increasing separation rather than being overtaken as Wildcats had been. Combat reports from that day describe the confusion Japanese pilots experience. One Zero pilot attempting to pursue a Hellcat after an unsuccessful deflection shot finds himself steadily losing ground as both aircraft climb. The American fighter simply pulls away in the vertical, maintaining a climb angle the Zero can't match while carrying full fuel and ammunition. When the Zero pilot pushes his climb to the limits, his airspeed drops dangerously low, and another Hellcat dives on him from above. The vertical trap has claimed its first victims. The engagement results in relatively few aircraft losses on both sides, but the tactical intelligence gained is invaluable. Japanese commanders receive detailed debriefs from surviving pilots, and those reports contain troubling information. The new American fighters possess climb performance that matches or exceeds the Zero. Despite being visibly larger and heavier aircraft, they carry heavier armament, as evidenced by the destructive power of their guns. And most concerning, American pilots are flying with disciplined tactical coordination, rather than the individual aggressiveness that characterized earlier combat. By September 1943, Hellcats are spreading across the Pacific carrier fleet. VF-1, VF-2, VF-5, VF-6, and VF-9 all transition to the new fighter, and each squadron brings back similar reports after their first engagements. The Japanese are probing, testing, trying to understand this new opponent's capabilities and limitations. Every combat produces more data for both sides, but the Americans hold the advantage. They know their aircraft's capabilities and are developing tactics specifically designed to exploit them. Japanese intelligence officers compile reports from multiple engagements throughout September and October. Pilots consistently mention the American fighters' ability to climb rapidly and maintain energy in vertical maneuvers. The reports use terms like unexpectedly powerful and difficult to pursue in climbing combat. Japanese Naval Aviation Command begins circulating tactical bulletins but changing ingrained doctrine and training. Will prove far more difficult than simply warning pilots about a new threat. The stage is set for the systematic exploitation of vertical superiority. American squadron commanders quickly recognize they have a weapon that can fundamentally change Pacific air combat. The Hellcat's climb rate isn't just a performance statistic, it's a tactical advantage that invalidates decades of Japanese fighter doctrine. Commander David McCampbell, who will become the Navy's top ace with 34 confirmed kills, describes it perfectly during squadron briefings. We don't fight their fight anymore. We make them fight ours, and our fight happens in the vertical. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. A Hellcat at sea level can reach 10,000 feet in approximately 4 minutes of sustained climbing while maintaining an airspeed of 160 knots. A Zero attempting the same climb will arrive seconds later, but with lower remaining airspeed, meaning less energy for maneuvering. Those seconds translate to positional advantage, and position is everything in air combat. The American pilot reaches altitude first, can observe the developing situation, and can choose whether to engage or climb higher. Squadron training throughout late 1943 hammers these concepts into every Hellcat pilot. The tactical doctrine is called fast and high, and it requires discipline that doesn't come naturally to aggressive young aviators. When a Zero appears below you, every instinct screams to dive immediately and engage. But the doctrine demands patience. Maintain altitude, observe the enemy's energy state, wait for the optimal moment, then dive with tremendous speed, make your firing pass. And here's the critical part. Resist the temptation to turn and chase. Instead, use that diving speed to climb back to altitude, extending away from the enemy while regaining your positional advantage. Japanese pilots find themselves in an impossible situation. Their training emphasized turning combat, where the Zero's 16-second turn radius at 230 knots gives them superiority over nearly every opponent they've faced. But Hellcat pilots simply won't turn. A Zero pilot might execute a perfect reversal, pulling his aircraft through a gut-wrenching turn that would make any pre-war instructor proud, only to find his target already 1,000 feet above him and climbing away. Pursuing means bleeding energy in a climb where the American holds the advantage. Not pursuing means conceding the initiative entirely. The vertical trap works because it forces Japanese pilots to make losing choices. Engage in the climb and accept inferior performance, or maintain altitude and allow Americans to dictate engagement timing. Some experienced Japanese pilots adapt by trying to stay above American formations, but Hellcats can be pre-positioned at altitude specifically to counter this. Combat air patrols now station themselves at 20,000 to 25,000 feet, altitudes where the Hellcat's two-stage supercharged engine still delivers strong performance while Japanese engines struggle with thin air. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu, who flies with VF6 and will finish the war with 19 confirmed kills, explains the psychological impact during post-war interviews. Japanese pilots had spent 2 years controlling the terms of engagement. They chose when to fight based on positional advantage. Now that control shifted entirely to American pilots. Vrasiu describes encounters where Zero pilots would attempt aggressive head-on passes, hoping to score quick kills, then break away and dive to escape rather than risk climbing combat. The hunted had become the hunters. The mathematics of energy management underpin everything. When a fighter climbs, it trades kinetic energy for potential energy, converting speed into altitude. The rate at which an aircraft can make this conversion while maintaining controllability defines its vertical performance. The Hellcat's power-to-weight ratio, combined with its efficient wing design, means it can sustain this conversion longer and more effectively than the Zero. A Hellcat pilot who starts a climb with 300 knots of airspeed can reach 15,000 feet while maintaining enough speed to maneuver. A Zero pilot attempting the same climb will arrive slower, more vulnerable, and out of position. By December 1943, engagement after engagement confirms the pattern. Japanese after-action reports increasingly mention American fighters that refuse combat or withdraw upward when approached, which is Japanese interpretation of American vertical fighting. But these aren't withdrawals. They're tactical repositioning moves that consistently result in American advantages and Japanese losses. The kill ratios begin shifting dramatically. In November 1943, Hellcat squadrons achieve 4-to-1 kill ratios against Zeros in several major engagements. By January 1944, some squadrons are reporting 6-to-1 or better. American signals intelligence operations in the Pacific have been reading Japanese naval communications since before the war through the code-breaking effort designated Magic and later Ultra. By late 1943, these intercepts provide real-time insight into how Japanese naval aviation is responding to the Hellcat threat. What Allied intelligence officers discover confirms what American pilots suspect. The Japanese High Command is issuing explicit tactical warnings about engaging Hellcats in vertical combat. The intercepts come through multiple channels: radio direction finding stations in Hawaii, Australia, and various Pacific islands monitor Japanese air-to-air frequencies during combat operations. Japanese pilots maintain better radio discipline than their German counterparts, but combat stress and tactical necessity mean they communicate during engagements. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, based at Pearl Harbor, employs Japanese linguists who translate these intercepts in near real time, building a picture of Japanese tactical thinking as it evolves. One intercept from November 1943, recorded during an engagement near Rabaul, captures a Japanese flight leader transmitting a warning to his wingmen. The translation reads, New American fighter climbs like our own. Do not follow into vertical, maintain energy and disengage. The term maintain energy is particularly significant because it shows Japanese pilots understand the physics of the problem. They simply lack aircraft capable of solving it. Their doctrine is adapting, but their equipment can't keep pace. More revealing are the formal tactical directives intercepted from Japanese Naval Aviation Headquarters. A December 1943 bulletin issued to units in the Central Pacific explicitly warns pilots about the Grumman fighter's vertical performance. The document, translated by intelligence analysts, states that the new American fighter possesses climbing ability equal to or exceeding the Type 0 and recommends pilots avoid prolonged vertical maneuvering when engaged. The directive suggests instead that pilots should attempt to draw American fighters into low-altitude, horizontal maneuvering combat where zero advantages might still apply. Commander Joseph Rochefort's intelligence team at Pearl Harbor compiles these intercepts into tactical summaries distributed to carrier air groups. American squadron commanders read them during pre-mission briefings, and pilots find validation in knowing their tactics are working exactly as intended. The Japanese aren't just being beaten. They're being beaten so consistently that their own command structure is warning pilots to avoid specific types of combat. That kind of tactical directive reveals desperation. Japanese pilot radio transmissions during the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 provide additional evidence. During fierce air battles over the Gilbert Islands on November 20th through 23rd, American radio intercept operators record multiple instances of Japanese pilots warning each other about climbing American fighters. One transmission, later translated, includes the phrase, "Do not chase upward, they are faster in the climb." Another simply warns, "Brake low," to brake low when Hellcats dive from altitude, indicating pilots are being trained to dive away rather than attempt to outclimb their pursuers. The intelligence advantage extends beyond just tactical knowledge. By understanding Japanese recognition of Hellcat capabilities, American planners can predict enemy responses. If Japanese doctrine now emphasizes avoiding vertical combat and trying to force horizontal engagements, American fighters can position themselves to make horizontal engagement impossible. Combat air patrols can be stationed at higher altitudes with greater confidence. Strike escorts can maintain energy states that keep them above potential threats. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley, one of the Navy's premier tacticians and commander of VF-10, uses these intelligence summaries to refine his squadron's approach. He trains his pilots to recognize when Japanese fighters are attempting to execute their new doctrine, diving away to avoid climbing combat. His counter is simple: don't chase the dive, maintain altitude, and wait for them to climb back up. Japanese pilots face a brutal choice: stay low where they can't threaten American strike packages, or climb back to relevant altitudes where Hellcats hold the advantage. The intercepted warnings represent more than just tactical adjustments. They reveal a fundamental shift in Pacific air combat psychology. For 2 years, Japanese pilots had approached combat with confidence built on technical superiority. Now their own commanders are telling them to avoid specific types of engagement with specific American aircraft. That's not adaptation. That's acknowledgement of inferiority. The Hellcat has broken Japanese aerial dominance not just through performance but through systematic exploitation of that performance in ways Japanese doctrine can't counter. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. June 19th, 1944 dawns clear over the Philippine Sea, and what follows will become the most lopsided aerial victory in naval aviation history. The battle that pilots will forever call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot is about to validate everything American carrier aviation has built toward for 2 years. Task Force 58, commanded by Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell, deploys 15 carriers with 956 aircraft, including 475 Hellcats. Opposing them, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet launches waves of aircraft from 9 carriers, determined to destroy the American invasion force off Saipan. The Japanese plan relies on shuttle bombing tactics, where aircraft would strike American ships, land at Guam or other Mariana airfields to refuel and rearm, then strike again on the return flight. It's an elegant concept that maximizes their aircraft's range advantage. But the plan assumes Japanese pilots can fight their way through American combat air patrols, and that assumption will prove catastrophically wrong. American radar detects the first incoming raid at 10:06 in the morning at a distance of 150 miles, giving Hellcat pilots time to climb to optimal interception altitude. Commander David McCampbell, leading the Essex Air Group, positions his Hellcats at 25,000 feet, more than 4 miles above the ocean. When Japanese formations appear below at 18,000 to 20,000 feet, American pilots hold every advantage. They have altitude, they have radar vectors providing perfect positioning, and they have aircraft that can dictate the terms of engagement. McCampbell's famous transmission, "All guns, this is base. Vector 270, climb to Angels 25, sends Hellcats streaming toward the incoming threat with disciplined precision. The first wave of 69 Japanese aircraft hits American defenses like water against a dam. Hellcats dive from altitude, rip through the formations with devastating gunnery passes, then climb back to altitude while Japanese pilots try desperately to respond. Zero pilots who attempt to climb after their attackers find themselves exactly where American doctrine wants them, low on energy, vulnerable, and unable to catch their tormentors. Those who dive away to maintain speed simply take themselves out of the fight, unable to threaten American ships, while Hellcats control the altitudes above. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu, flying from Lexington, intercepts a formation of 50 Japanese dive bombers with minimal fighter escort. In a single engagement lasting 8 minutes, he shoots down 6 aircraft, demonstrating the Hellcats' devastating effectiveness when properly employed. His tactical report describes how he used altitude advantage to make repeated diving attacks, climbing away after each pass while Japanese fighters struggled to respond. He never allows himself to be drawn into turning combat, never gives his opponents the fight they trained for. The second Japanese wave of 130 aircraft fares no better. American fighter directors watching radar plots vector fresh Hellcat squadrons into perfect interception positions. The Japanese formation fragments under constant attacks from above. Pilots who try to maintain formation discipline become predictable targets. Those who break formation to engage individually lose mutual support and fall to coordinated American tactics. The vertical advantage means American pilots can observe the entire battle developing below them, choosing targets and timing attacks for maximum effect. Wave 3 consists of 47 aircraft and Wave 4 numbers 82. Both meet the same systematic destruction. By the end of June 19th, Japanese naval aviation has lost approximately 243 carrier aircraft and 50 land-based aircraft. American losses total 29 aircraft, with most falling to anti-aircraft fire rather than aerial combat. The kill ratio exceeds 10-1, and several Hellcat pilots achieve ace status in a single day. Ensign Wilbur Spiderweb shoots down 6 aircraft. Lieutenant Junior Grade William Bill Stewart claims 5. The names go on and on. June 20th brings a desperate Japanese retreat and an aggressive American pursuit. As Japanese carriers flee westward, American strikes launch at maximum range, knowing pilots will face nighttime carrier recoveries after exhausting their fuel. Hellcats escort the strike packages, and when Japanese combat air patrol rises to intercept, American fighters use their now familiar vertical tactics. Japanese pilots, already demoralized and exhausted, break off combat rather than accept engagements they know they can't win. The 2-day battle costs Japan over 600 aircraft and 3 carriers sunk. American carrier aviation has achieved absolute air superiority, and the Hellcat's vertical performance is the blade that cut Japanese resistance to pieces. But the story doesn't end with tactical dominance. It extends into the psychological and industrial collapse of Japanese naval aviation. Japanese naval aviation recognizes the problem, but finds themselves trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The warnings circulate, the tactical directives are issued. Experienced pilots understand they face an opponent with superior vertical performance. But knowing you're outmatched and fixing the problem are entirely different challenges, especially when your industrial base is crumbling under Allied bombing and your pilot training pipeline has been devastated by 2 years of attrition. The most obvious solution would be developing a new fighter to counter the Hellcats' capabilities. Japan does produce the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden and Kawanishi N1KJ Shiden, both of which offer improved performance over the Zero. The Raiden can climb at 3,000 feet per minute and reach 380 miles per hour, numbers that finally match American fighters. But production problems plague both designs. The Raiden suffers engine reliability issues throughout its service life, with the Mitsubishi Kase engine proving temperamental and prone to overheating. Only 476 are built during the entire war. The Shiden faces different problems despite being an excellent aircraft on paper. It's adapted from the Kawanishi N1K floatplane fighter, inheriting a complex landing gear design that causes maintenance nightmares. The aircraft doesn't reach operational units until early 1944, and production never exceeds 1,400 units total. Even when these superior fighters reached frontline squadrons, pilot quality has degraded so severely that the aircraft's capabilities can't be fully exploited. A talented pilot in a Zero is more effective than a mediocre pilot in a theoretically superior Shiden. The training pipeline collapse is killing Japanese naval aviation more surely than any combat loss. Pre-war Japanese pilot training was extraordinarily thorough, requiring 300 to 700 flight hours before a pilot joined an operational squadron. These men were elite aviators by any standard, but combat consumed them faster than the training system could replace them. By mid-1944, new Japanese pilots arrive at squadrons with 100 to 150 flight hours total. Some have as few as 40 hours. These barely trained aviators face American pilots who average 300 flight hours plus extensive gunnery and tactical training. Doctrine can't adapt fast enough either. The vertical fighting directives distributed throughout the fleet require skills that novice pilots simply don't possess. Energy management, the ability to judge your aircraft's energy state and your opponent's energy state simultaneously while under combat stress, takes extensive training to master. American pilots drill these concepts repeatedly in stateside training squadrons. Japanese pilots are rushed through abbreviated training, shoved into cockpits, and expected to survive against vastly more experienced opponents flying superior aircraft. Some experienced Japanese pilots do adapt individually. Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, describes in his memoir how he modified his tactics after encountering Hellcats. He avoids climbing combat entirely, instead using hit-and-run attacks from favorable positions and immediately disengaging before American fighters can respond. But Sakai is exceptional, a survivor with over 500 combat missions. His tactics require judgment and skill that new pilots can't replicate. One veteran can adapt, but squadrons full of novices can't. The strategic situation makes everything worse. By late 1944, Japan is fighting defensively across a contracting perimeter. Japanese fighters are forced into combat, protecting critical installations, shipping, and homeland approaches. They can't choose favorable engagement conditions because they have to defend fixed locations. American carrier task forces, by contrast, attack when and where they choose, always with numerical superiority, and always with the option to disengage if conditions turn unfavorable. Fuel shortages compound every problem. Advanced pilot training requires fuel for flight hours. Japan's synthetic fuel production and dwindling petroleum imports mean training is cut even shorter. Operational squadrons receive reduced fuel allocations, limiting their ability to maintain proficiency through practice. Some units can't afford training flights at all, meaning pilots only fly during actual combat missions. You cannot maintain edge-of-envelope skills, the kind of high-energy maneuvering required to exploit or counter vertical tactics, without regular practice. The final problem is psychological. Japanese naval aviation culture emphasized aggressive offensive spirit, the concept of seishin or fighting spirit. Tactical directives, telling pilots to avoid certain types of combat, contradicted deeply ingrained cultural values. Some pilots feel that refusing vertical combat is cowardly, that proper fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantage. This cultural resistance to defensive tactics means some pilots ignore the warnings entirely and engage Hellcats in exactly the vertical combat they'd been told to avoid. They die maintaining their honor, but they still die, and their deaths accomplish nothing except adding to the kill tallies of American aces. When the last guns fall silent over Tokyo Bay in September 1945, the Grumman F6F Hellcat's combat record stands as one of the most dominant performances in aviation history. The numbers are staggering and almost beyond belief. 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 306 additional aircraft destroyed on the ground, all achieved at a loss of only 270 Hellcats in air-to-air combat. That 19-to-1 kill ratio represents the most lopsided aerial victory margin of any major fighter aircraft in the Second World War. No other fighter, not the Spitfire, not the Mustang, not the Messerschmitt 109, achieves anything comparable. The climb rate advantage is the fundamental factor underlying this dominance. Every other advantage, the heavy armament, the rugged construction, the pilot armor, matters tremendously. But the ability to control the vertical dimension of combat makes everything else possible. American pilots can choose when to engage and when to extend away. They can position themselves above threats and dive with decisive speed advantage. They can escape unfavorable situations by climbing to altitudes where pursuing aircraft can't follow effectively. This flexibility is unprecedented in Pacific carrier operations. Individual pilot achievements illustrate the Hellcat's effectiveness. Captain David McCampbell's 34 confirmed kills make him the Navy's ace of aces. Commander Cecil Harris finishes with 24 victories. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia develops the mowing machine tactical formation, pairing fighters in mutually supporting elements that exploit vertical tactics to devastating effect, and finishes with 23 kills. These aren't just talented pilots. They're tacticians who understand how to extract maximum effectiveness from their aircraft's capabilities. The Hellcat's operational versatility extends beyond pure air superiority. The F6F5 Newton's night fighter variant, equipped with APS-6 radar in a fairing on the starboard wing, hunts Japanese aircraft in darkness when previous night fighter attempts had proven inadequate. These aircraft destroy 254 Japanese planes at night, providing 24-hour air defense for carrier task forces. The F6F5 can carry 2,000 pounds of bombs, or 6 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, making it an effective ground attack platform. Some Hellcats operate as photo-reconnaissance aircraft with cameras replacing guns. The basic airframe strength and reliability make all these roles possible. Production numbers reflect the Hellcat's strategic importance. Grumman's Bethpage facility produces 12,275 F6F Hellcats between 1942 and November 1945, when production ends just weeks after Japan's surrender. At peak production in March 1945, the factory delivers 605 aircraft in a single month, an average of more than 20 Hellcats per day. This industrial achievement means American carriers never lack aircraft regardless of combat losses. Every damaged Hellcat can be replaced within weeks, sometimes days. Japanese factories, by contrast, struggle to replace losses at all. The Hellcat's design philosophy influences post-war American fighter development profoundly. The emphasis on vertical performance, energy management, and boom and zoom tactics becomes foundational concepts for jet fighter design. The Korean War's F-9F Panthers and F-2H Banshees are essentially jet-powered applications of Hellcat combat doctrine. Even modern fighter tactics still emphasize energy management and vertical maneuvering, concepts that Hellcat pilots refined into systematic doctrine during the Pacific War. Foreign operators use Hellcats extensively during and after the war. Britain's Fleet Air Arm receives 1,182 Hellcats under Lend-Lease, operating them from escort carriers in the Atlantic and Pacific. The French Aéronaval flies Hellcats during the Indochina War. Uruguay's Navy operates them until 1960, making the Hellcat one of the longest-serving World War II fighters in active military service. These extended service lives testify to the aircraft's fundamental soundness and operational reliability. The human cost of Pacific air combat makes the Hellcat's protective features as important as its performance. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevent fires that had killed countless pilots in earlier fighters. Armor plating behind the pilot seat stops bullets and shrapnel that would have been fatal wounds. The robust structure means damaged Hellcats return to carriers when other fighters would have gone into the ocean. Navy statistics show that Hellcat pilots have significantly higher survival rates than pilots of any previous carrier fighter. And survival means experienced pilots fly multiple combat tours, further multiplying American tactical advantages. Japanese pilots who survived the war acknowledge the Hellcat's impact in post-war interviews. Saburo Sakai, who lives to become one of Japan's most famous aces, states that the Hellcat's introduction marks the turning point in Pacific air combat. Other Japanese veterans describe the psychological impact of facing an opponent that controls engagement terms completely. The warrior culture that had sustained Japanese military effectiveness for decades can't overcome fundamental material disadvantage, and the Hellcat represents that disadvantage in its most concentrated form. The F6F Hellcat's legacy isn't just in the statistics or the technological achievements. It's in the fundamental shift it creates in aerial warfare doctrine. Before the Hellcat, dogfighting means turning combat, close-range maneuvering contests where the most agile aircraft generally wins. After the Hellcat, dogfighting means energy management, vertical tactics, and systematic exploitation of power to weight advantages. That doctrinal revolution shapes jet-age air combat and continues influencing fighter tactics into the 21st century. The Hellcat doesn't just win the Pacific Air War through superior climb rate. It changes forever how air superiority fighters are designed, flown, and employed in combat. 3,400 feet per minute isn't just a number on a performance chart. It's the vertical advantage that lets American pilots climb above their enemies, dive with overwhelming speed, and climb away before Japanese pilots can respond. It's the capability that transforms defensive weaving into offensive dominance. It's the weapon that breaks Japanese naval aviation's back and never lets it recover. When Japanese pilots first see Hellcats climbing at rates they can't match, their radio warnings back to base carry more than tactical information. They carry the recognition that American fighters have achieved parity in the one area where Zeros had always dominated. And once that parity exists, every other American advantage, the armor, the firepower, industrial production, the pilot training, compounds into overwhelming superiority. The climb rate is the key that unlocks everything else. 3,400 feet per minute, the number that changed the Pacific War. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.